very rewarding and exciting to see so much interest and excitement in the platform. Really appreciate it. So it's fantastic to see everyone come out today to hear all about Amazon and about our products and services. By now, those of you that are new to Amazon Web Services, might be feeling a little inundated by all the alphabet soup, all the three-letter acronyms that we use to describe our products and services. We have a huge number of them, and they're being thrown at you non-stop. But I'd like you to consider, when we talk today, that there really are just four fundamental categories of IT infrastructure that we're dealing with here. There's compute, database, storage, and networking. And those four categories are common to just about every example of IT infrastructure needs out there. So when we talk about these things, and we talk about all the services that Werner's done a great job in describing as well, on top of this, we describe how these things interact and overlay on top of those basic four components. Of course, interacting with all this is up to you in terms of how you use the APIs, use the SDKs, and we're going to get a little bit more detail into this afternoon in the developer track, in the startup track, and you can learn more about that and how that fits into your applications. So what we really want to focus on in this session is a better understanding, transferring a better understanding of Amazon's philosophy, pricing philosophy. This is really what we're all about. It's the ability for you to pick and choose from those components, from those different services and products, just the ones that you need, and then apply them as you need them on a pay-as-you-go model, using only what you need. So that's really what we're going to focus on here. Now, what happens when companies consider or evaluate using cloud computing? They're going to do what we call a total cost of ownership evaluation or comparison. And what we're really hoping that customers take the time to do is do an apples-to-apples comparison. It's so easy to do an apples-to-oranges comparison when you're comparing things that really ought to be compared. There's no way that you can compare an on-premises solution accurately to a cloud solution unless you take the whole picture into account. So we're going to go into a few details today which describe where the apples-to-apples comparison can really be made accurately and honestly and fairly. So let's go about that now. The first step that I'm going to ask you to consider is evaluating which use cases, which applications you are actually considering to put into the cloud. Now, if you take a look at your organization, big or small, you're going to have the ability to list all of your IT assets and really choose an appropriate or a suitable application that needs comparison between building an on-premises solution and putting it in the cloud. If you look at all these applications in the big picture, you'll notice that they have a lot of interdependencies. Some rely on others to be up all the time. Others have dependencies on the interaction, very, very rapid interaction, chatter, speed, and so on with the APIs in terms of how these applications communicate with each other. But it's very important to classify all of those IT assets that you have into various categories. Now, we are not saying, we're definitely not advocating that all of your applications can be migrated to the cloud overnight. That's definitely not what we're trying to push here. But there is a spectrum of applications across the security spectrum, across the reliability spectrum, across the durability spectrum, at which there is a point, then those applications to the left of that point become very suitable candidates to consider moving into the cloud. So if you can stack rank all of these IT assets, all of these applications in your organization, you'll very quickly be able to push to the top those that are most suitable for moving into the cloud. Which applications do you have that are really a big headache to you? Which ones are costing you a lot of money? Maybe the durability is super important, but you're just spending too much money trying to make sure that the uptime is there. Maybe you're not considering which applications are underutilized, in which case they could be migrated to the cloud, freeing up resources for you to use for other use cases. So once you've done this, once you've analyzed all your IT assets, you'll very quickly realize that there are some perfect candidates to compare, apples to apples, on-premises solution to moving into the cloud. And when you do that, you'll realize that those are the ones that we should really be focused on, get them into the cloud, get your understanding of Amazon Web Services and your confidence level up with Amazon Web Services so that the next big ones come along more easily. And then you can tackle the really big ones. All we're trying to say here basically is don't try and go for the huge applications up front. We just want to make sure that we encourage as much success. Now, we've talked to a lot of customers, and we've realized that we can pretty much block the three types of usage patterns that I show up here. Most applications fall into one of these three. The steady state, the spiky predictable, and that might be a monthly running report on payroll or something, and then the unpredictable ones. And I'll get into these a little bit more in a little bit of detail in a few minutes, and we can actually describe. So if you take your IT assets and you identify a suitable candidate, let's take that candidate with its interdependencies and talk about how we're going to move that into the cloud. What are the considerations there? The second step that we want to go through is to make sure that we're really honest about taking into consideration all of the hidden costs that make up running an application in your own premises. This is super important. Companies like Gartner have done an immense amount of research and investigation into large companies to identify all of the hidden costs that actually make up what it takes to run these kind of major data centers. I see a couple of you nodding your heads. You're looking at this list and you're saying, yep, those are headaches that I recognize. These are things that you have to deal with. So another way of putting it is if you compare the upfront costs, the monthly costs of an on-premises solution versus a colo versus an in-the-cloud solution, there are a lot of differences here that we really need to take note of. Don't underestimate the hidden costs that lead up to some of these acquisitions. You know that to buy a piece of hardware is not a simple matter of just writing the invoice. There's a lot of time that builds up into that when you need to research, you need to negotiate, you need to evaluate a whole lot of new hardware options that might be necessary before you can actually make that purchase. That's an expense. That's a headache that you have to go through because you can't just go ahead and buy hardware until you know it's suitable for your needs. So these kind of, they're augmented to the actual problems that you have, and in terms of actually wasting your time, in terms of feeding into them, they actually cost you a huge amount of productivity before you can even start using these. Some of you will really recognize this. Show of hands, who here has been into one of these kind of data centers where you're working with it? I see a lot of smiles there, yeah. You're having to deal with a lot of these headaches. So don't underestimate what a hardware administrator actually does. There's a lot of hassle that goes into not only provisioning, setting it up, securing it, etc., but all the lead time that comes up to that is also a delay to your organization. You can't get going with your applications, with your implementation, until that hardware is in place. But to put it in place is a huge amount of effort. Now, once you've got your hardware in place, up and running, that by itself is a feat. There's an ongoing administrative cost, especially with things like high-performance databases. The need to keep your uptime there, making sure that the software updates are there, making sure that the networking is constantly going to be providing you the service level that you need. These are all headaches and costs. Train? Okay, so bearing in mind these are the kind of things that you're dealing with, we now want to take into account what are the actual prices of cloud computing. Now, we've been very, very transparent with Amazon Web Services. All our prices are up on the website. You can see them publicly all the time. And the reason why we do that is to make sure that there's no misunderstanding about what prices you can avail yourself to. But it's very important to understand those prices correctly. Now, we have the immense leverage of scale within Amazon Web Services. We have an incredible number of customers, hundreds and thousands of customers across 190 countries that allow us to aggregate all the purchasing power, the automation, the efficiency gains of actually running large-scale data centers. If you look at some of the huge leap forwards we've had with our staff, it enables a few number of Amazon employees to actually control an immense amount of infrastructure. This gain in efficiency is something we pass on to you as a customer. Every time we're able to increase the performance of our machines, delivering to you better performance at exactly the same price, we'll lower that price. So this is quite a remarkable claim, that we've actually lowered our prices 20 times in the last 5 years. Now, let's understand something. Once you're on the cloud, these price drops are automatically transferred to you. You will literally get your next bill at a lower price. There's nothing you need to do or opt in or sign up or fill out a coupon or anything. Any of these price drops are immediately transferred to you, so you can take advantage of them right away. And that's a very powerful thing that we can offer. In addition to this, part of our pricing philosophy mandates that we give you a better discount the more you use us. So it's a high volume, low margin business, and we apply that same concept to storage, to data transfer, and even large scale purchases of reserved instances, which I'll get into in a few minutes. Now let's take this back to basics. If you consider a typical example of a company that's putting a whole lot of media or storage into the cloud, let's say over a period of 3 years, they might be aiming to set, eventually putting around about 45 terabytes of data storage into the cloud. We all know that on day one, the amount of storage you actually have in the cloud is 0. So a traditional purchasing or a traditional provisioning of storage capacity would mean that you have an inefficiency from day one on an on-premises solution. Whereas in the cloud, with a pure pay-as-you-go model, there's no way that you're losing out until you actually put the data in. And you can see from a graph like this, which is very typical of a lot of companies, there's a gradual period over which adoption of the service takes place. And over that period, there's no need for you to be spending a huge amount of money. This reflects itself in the red section, right? Essentially, you've got an underutilization problem which represents waste. You can at least rest assured that any storage you have in Amazon's cloud is 100% utilized because you're only paying for what you're actually using. A huge benefit there as well. Now, in terms of evaluating our services, we provide a huge number of free tiers on a whole lot of services. In fact, just this last week, we added Amazon's RDS, Relational Database Service, to that list, which allows you to sign up for an account as a new customer and evaluate these products the same way that they're being used by all the major companies you've heard from and customers to make sure that they're right for you at no expense. In addition, we have many of our services actually provided simply for free. And you get the bonus of these services, which tie in a lot of the other services together for nothing, just by moving all your stuff into the cloud. So it actually makes it a lot more efficient for you to work with the services and takes over a lot of the time-wasting efforts that you've done by offloading some of the typical services. You heard Dr. Vogel's talk about SES, SNS, etc. Just the time it takes to understand what these services do, email services, notification services, is an expense on your system. But if your company can just spin them up and use them in Amazon, you can save yourself a tremendous amount of effort and cost. We also allow as much data to flow into our network as you like, no charge. This is a remarkable thing. Of course, we want all your data in, and any transfer that you have between data instances, between instances within the same availability zone is free as well. So what this means is that if you have a lot of applications that have those interdependencies that we talked about earlier, all residing in the same region and in the same availability zone, there's a huge cost reduction instead of having them deployed amongst multiple data centers. Okay, we've done that. We've done the first 3 steps. Now comes the exciting part. And this is where we're going to dive into a little bit more detail about how we offer the flexibility to use various different pricing models. Now, in terms of compute, this is our EC2 product. The compute aspect of what we offer is actually available to you in 3 distinct different pricing models. And I'll go into each one of those in a little bit of detail. On-demand, reserved pricing, and spot pricing. Now, we're all familiar with the on-demand pricing. This is your typical pay-as-you-go, per-hour basis. And a typical example of a simple micro machine going at 2 cents an hour is available to you to switch on and off just like a light bulb. But then we offer something quite fantastic to actually save money in the long term, and these are reserved instances. Now, the way these work is there's a small upfront fee, and then the ongoing hourly rate is actually vastly reduced from the on-demand price. And these come in a number of different flavors. You can commit to a 1-year or a 3-year reserved instance across 3 different levels of utilization, light, medium, and heavy. And we'll see how all of these play into various use cases in a minute. Just want to give you some idea of how this translates into a utilization factor. On the x-axis there, you have the utilization aspect of your compute. And as you go from left to right, you'll see that different utilization models actually make more sense. While there might be a bit of an upfront cost for instance, a heavy utilization compute, the ability for you to use that at in excess of, for instance, 75% utilization gives you an immense saving. 71% savings over a 3-year period. If you look at the sweet spot of some of these, depending on the utilization, and only you know for your applications and your customer base what you're actually going to be using them for, but if you have something that falls into one of these sweet spots, the ability for you to purchase a reserved instance means that you can make tremendous savings. And getting back to this apples-to-apples comparison, we encourage you to make sure that you're considering the optimal version of these reserved instances when you do your comparison. That really makes it an accurate and fair comparison. Okay. Let's dive into some of these now. If you look at some of the usage patterns, for instance, we started with the steady state, you can rest assured that in these kind of applications, for an extended period of time, you're going to be using a certain amount of load. You've settled into your compute, you know which size instances you need. It makes sense that you would be able to predict fairly accurately, without much variation, in a case like this, how much compute power you'll need. Now, let's take a consideration of that from a physical perspective. An on-premises solution would require you to purchase enough compute power to cover the full load over that period of time. And if we match that with an equivalent number of reserved instances of the heavy utilization type, we can see that the comparison would actually come out something like this. Now, without digging into the numbers in too much detail, you'll notice that the savings of option 1, where we're going fully into reserved instances, can be dramatic. That's a huge percentage saving, 68%. Moving on to a combination of on-demand and reserved instances, you can see that the efficiency drops off, so the percentage savings actually drop off. However, this is an interesting result at the end here. To use a pure on-demand model in this case would actually be more expensive than running your on-premises solution. Now, why are we showing you that? The reason is that there's a very definite need for you to take the right aspects or the right reserved instances when you're comparing them to your apples-to-apples comparisons. Because in this case, it makes more sense for you to run an on-premises solution unless you take advantage of the reserved instance pricing. So we implore you, please take full cognizance of all the reserved instance pricing, the latest pricing available. We've had some customers actually show us spreadsheets with pricing on them that's a year and a half old. And no wonder they're getting very disparate results in comparison. All right, let's move on to a second example. What about spiky predictable loads? These are spikes that happen over above a baseline, but they happen often enough that you know pretty much with certainty when they're going to happen. Now, if you're building a physical environment, a physical data center to cope with this, you have no choice but to provision enough to handle your worst case scenario. That's that red line up there. If you had to build reserved instances into a cloud architecture, you would only need to buy reserved instances up to the baseline and then fill in the rest with on-demand instances. This is starting to show some of the amazing flexibility that Amazon Web Services offers. Because now in a combination scenario, you can see that you can actually turn off those on-demand instances literally at the end of the spike. On an hourly basis, you can reevaluate how many of them have to be running. This is a very powerful notion. The on-demand pay-as-you-go model really starts to shine here. In numbers, you can compare the on-premises solution to the 3 options again. The first option, which would be a pure unreserved instances, would actually end up costing you far more. So that's not something you'd want to do, even though you could still probably save money more than an on-premises solution. But the real savings comes in using a combination. In this case, heavy reserved instances, heavy utilization, used for the baseline product, and then on-demand for the spike loads, flexibly changing them when you need them and when you don't. So that gives you some idea of a different option applying to a different usage pattern. Now let's talk about the third usage pattern. This is the one that scares most of you. This is the unpredictable spiky workload. Now, of course, everyone predicts the graph up far and to the right. That's where we all want it to go. But what would happen if the situation was reversed? Instead of the success that you predict, you actually end up having less performance. If you are a physical data center, you have to be ready for the worst, or in this case, the best situation of moving all that traffic up. So you've purchased ahead of time in anticipation for a lot of success. But when the success doesn't hit, in the case here, your actual on-demand instances come into play. This is where you have the flexibility and the need to actually switch off machines very rapidly when things don't seem to be going as well as they could be. In this case, a combination of light and medium utilization reserved instances with on-demand actually gives you the most flexibility. If you look at how this numbers work out, this really gives you the fact that you can actually switch off a light and medium reserved instance and not pay for it as soon as you switch it off. That flexibility, similar to an on-demand model, gives you a very much varying ability to change your costs per month. So looking at this in numbers, you can see that the percentage savings of a pure reserved instance would be similar to on-premises, not as efficient. But the optimal solution actually comes in using as many on-demand instances as you can. So I hope that makes sense in terms of the cost-effectiveness options and how you can choose to use which one you want, which one makes most sense for your usage pattern. So getting back to my second point, make sure that you consider which application is really appropriate or which one should be used for which example. Of course, this leads to something that Dr. Vogel's talked about a lot in his talk. It's the ability to encourage innovation at very low cost. We want you to be able to try and experiment and set up a whole lot of different options without incurring a huge amount of expense. Because that gives you the ability to innovate faster, it gives you the ability to try a whole lot of new things faster, there's going to be faster progress. And without the headaches of all the IT infrastructure going behind it, you can do this on a much more rapid cycle. So now what about the success story? This is really what we want you to have. This is the ultimate goal for most of you, is to actually move the system up and far to the right and be successful. But here's a problem. What happens if you're more successful than you even thought you were going to be? If you built a data center to cover your best case scenario and things go even better, you're really in a problem situation. Because all of a sudden now, the traffic far exceeds what you have a physical capability of, and you can't get that new physical capability in fast enough to avoid this situation, which is when you have disappointed your customers by not having enough infrastructure in place. And again, this is where Amazon's cloud computing really, really shines. If you've purchased reserved instances and you're ready to use those up to the baseline of how much you expect traffic to happen, but then traffic exceeds it, you can just switch on as many on-demand instances as you require and meet that demand as it comes in. So we immediately have a success now where you can actually get the customers getting what they want, uninterrupted service, and of course the bill just goes up in comparison to the amount of traffic, which is what you want. All of this happens much more efficiently. Now I'm going to talk about the third pricing model. It's a little bit of a leap to understand this, but I want to make sure that everyone really grasps the benefits of using this. And these are the spot instances. What is spot? It gives you the ability as a customer to bid on how much you wish to pay for the compute power that we have available to us. So instead of paying on demand or reserved instances, you actually set the price yourself. Now, as of 9 a.m. this morning, that similar product, which was 2 cents an hour on demand, 1 cent an hour with reserved instance, was only half a cent per hour at that time. But this price fluctuates all the time. You have full access, if you go to the management console, to have a look at the price history. This is an example over a period of a month of an M1 extra large. In one of our data centers, you can see that the price actually varies quite considerably in a certain band over a period of a month, and there are infrequent spikes every now and then. Now you might think, what am I going to use this for? Well, the one nuance about spot instances is that if someone comes again and bids higher than you, we will give them the instance. So you have to be ready for an interrupted work. In other words, your instances might not be yours the next hour. You've got them now to do some work on, but they might not be available the next hour after that. So what we've come across is a whole bunch of use cases where companies are really using this capability for workloads that don't have to be done immediately. These are workloads that can be put off and done at a cheaper price as long as they get done within a certain period of time. Video transcoding is a great example. And in fact, we've had some companies had some immense success with various different bidding strategies. If you look at the distribution here over the price range, you'll see that some customers have actually opted to bid below the on-demand price, which makes sense. They want the work done, but rather than pay full price of on-demand, they simply wanted to get it done at a lower price. So they bid a lower price, and if they get it, they get the work done. Then you get companies that actually bid at or around the on-demand price. What this allows them to do is pretty much assure that they will get the compute power, but if the price actually drops lower, they only end up paying that lower price. So similar to a typical bidding model, you're only paying as much as the market dictates. So over a certain period of time, they might end up paying much less than the market, but they're actually bidding at or around the on-demand price. And then you have a strange anomaly. You have customers that actually bid far in excess of the on-demand price. Now, why would they do this? Because they're willing to accept that every now and then, when the spike on prices happens, they actually gain from the overall month of spending much, much less. They end up spending far less during the times that the price is below on demand, and they're willing to absorb a slight increase in price when the spikes happen. A great example of a customer of ours that's really making good use of this is Vimeo. They get uploads, tremendous amounts of uploads every day of video transcoding to do. Now what happens when those videos come in? They have two different types of customers. The freemium, what they're doing is literally saying, we will take your work, we'll get it done when it suits us at our price. So they're bidding far below the on-demand price, and when that price drops, they actually get the transcoding done. But then they have premium customers for which they're willing to spend extra money because those customers are paying them, and they're actually using reserved instances to get the job done very, very quickly. Again, a combination of the two allows them the flexibility of providing both services. Now I'm going to get to the fifth point. When you are considering a total cost of ownership, or as we like to say, the total cost of non-ownership if you choose to use the cloud, it's really important that you take into account all the intangibles. These are things that don't translate directly into dollars, but they actually make a huge difference in the running of your organization. So one of the biggest aspects of this is security. If you consider the scale with which Amazon has built our data centers and built up our team, we have been in a position to hire the very best security experts in the world. We now provide that same level of security to all of our major customers. And you've heard names thrown around today like Shell, Samsung, NASA, the federal government of the US. If the security is good enough for them, we think it should be good enough for most of our customers, in fact, all of our customers. We've provided a very, very high level of security to all of those customers at the same price, which is it's included in all services. So no matter whether you're an early adopter, a new customer of 1 hour, or a customer that's been with us for several years, you can avail yourself to all of those same security benefits. And all the certifications and so on you can read about on our website. But consider this, that some of our customers, some of our biggest customers have paid us the ultimate compliment in telling us that once their data is in Amazon's cloud, they truly feel that it is safer and more secure than it was under their own control. That's saying something. And if you consider that Amazon.com itself runs on Amazon Web Services, we have everything, we stand to lose everything if we don't keep that security up. So the same security that maintains control over our huge number of credit card transactions on Amazon.com protects your data as soon as you join Amazon Web Services. Of course, we can't say enough about the flexibility and the agility that moving to the cloud leverages. This really gives you a huge empowerment. The ability to deploy your applications globally, worldwide, at the touch of a button is something that you shouldn't really discount as being hugely saving in terms of your costs. The ability for you to get your new applications up, the speed with which you can get to market is a huge cost saving that you can really make sure that you're able to take advantage of just by moving into the cloud. None of these systems are available to you, none of this flexibility and agility is available to you when you've purchased physical hardware and you now have to work with that. So that's an incredibly powerful notion. Of course, all of this translates into one big focus for your business. We want you to focus on what makes your customers happy, not on IT. It's our job to take that headache and that burden off of your shoulders. One of the aspects of cloud computing that's really important to think about as well is the fact that you can revisit your architecture, in theory, on an hourly basis. There's nothing to stop you changing the instance types, using new tools and services that we provide. Literally, on an hourly basis, you can change that. So we encourage our customers to consider their architecture and then reconsider their architecture and reconfigure as appropriate. Anything physical you've got in a data center is set in stone. You can't just return a whole bunch of hardware, a whole bunch of networking gear 2 days after you've purchased it. With Amazon Cloud, you can switch that system off that you switched on last hour and change it to a different one. And with the amazing amount of innovation that you're seeing out of Amazon Web Services, you can see the benefit of being able to change these things very rapidly and take advantage of new products and services as they come out. Finally, let me leave you with this. We would like to give you the intangible of a good night's sleep. No one wants to see you wasting a whole bunch of headache and time worrying about your IT when we can take care of it for you. So make sure that you count that in your apples-to-apples comparison, because this is something that we can offer you just by leveraging all the cloud computing services. So when you slice it, make sure that your comparisons take into account all the relevant aspects of costs that you're really incurring in running systems on your own premises versus running them in the cloud. Okay, to summarize, this is our price philosophy. We pay as you go. We allow you to pay less the more you use it. We invite you to actually use reserved instances in different combinations as your use cases or usage patterns require. And finally, I'll put at the bottom there, we have an open mind with custom pricing. If you're an incredibly high traffic or high volume customer and you can represent a case that we don't meet in our pricing, we would be very happy to talk to you about it. We're very interested in new models, innovations like spot pricing and reserved instances and reserved instance marketplace. These things all came about from listening to customers and seeing if we can address their specific needs. So I'll leave you with a call to action. Go and visit our economics site. aws.amazon.com/economics has all the things that I've been talking about. We also have some interactive cost calculators that allow you to estimate the costs of your infrastructure and compare them to what it's costing you right now. Just make sure you do that apples-to-apples comparison and take into account all the hidden costs as well there. Finally, I'll let you know that we've just released an IDC report on our website. There's a link there that you can download it, which describes in very much detail how some of our biggest customers have actually seen a tremendous return on investment. Please go and read this and understand about it, and I hope this gives you a bit of an understanding, and enjoy the rest of your day. I'm going to hand it back to Shane. Thank you very much.